Under the wide Texas sky, where the wind carried secrets through the mesquite and the earth smelled of dust and old dreams, there lay a ranch known as the Whispering Spur. It was the kind of place where the sun came up hard and left slow, painting the horizon in fire. Folks said the land had seen more broken hearts than summer storms, and maybe they were right. For on that land lived a girl named Clara May, the ranch boss's only daughter, and a cowboy whose name would be whispered long after he was gone, Jesse Cole. Jesse was the kind of man who didn't say much. The world had taught him that silence was safer than promises. He came to the Whispering Spur after the war took most of what he had. A horse, a saddle, and a worn-out hat were all he brought with him. But there was something else too, a look in his eyes that said he'd seen loss and learned to ride with it. The ranch boss, Hank May, saw a steady hand and a strong back, and that was enough to hire him. What Hank didn't see was the storm that would follow once his daughter looked Jesse's way. Clara May was not the kind of woman who belonged in a drawing room. She belonged out there where the wind was wild. She'd ride bareback faster than the boys, fix a fence quicker than a foreman, and talk to the land like it was her oldest friend. Folks said she had her mother's spirit, restless, kind, and too bright for her own good. But being the boss's daughter meant rules. Rules about who she could ride with, talk to, or dream about. And the #1 rule was simple: never fall for a hired cowboy. The first time she saw Jesse, he was breaking a Mustang that no man could touch. The horse was wild, kicking dust and rage into the morning light. Every man had failed to ride it, but Jesse moved differently. Calm. Quiet. Like he understood the fire in the animal instead of fighting it. Clara stood by the corral fence, watching as he leaned close, whispered something only the wind could hear, and finally swung into the saddle. The Mustang bucked and screamed, but Jesse stayed on, firm as a shadow. When it was done, and the horse stood trembling but still, Jesse patted its neck like an old friend. That's when she knew. She didn't just see a cowboy, she saw a man who carried storms inside him and somehow made peace with them. For days after, Clara found excuses to be near the stables. Maybe she'd bring water to her hands or check the tack for her father's rides. Jesse noticed, though he said nothing. But the way his eyes followed her when he thought no one saw, it told a story all its own. There was longing there and fear too. He knew what it meant to love something he couldn't keep. And yet, like the sun and the horizon, their paths kept finding each other. Summer stretched long and dry that year. The riverbeds thinned to cracked clay, and tempers burned just as hot. The ranch boss was a proud man, fair, but stubborn. He wanted a son-in-law with land, not a cowboy who slept under the stars. Clara knew it. Jesse knew it. And still, every night when the moon rose silver over the fields, she'd find herself listening for the soft rhythm of boots near the barn. It wasn't love yet, not the kind you confess, but it was growing in the quiet, in the stolen glances and the gentle nods that said more than words ever could. One evening, the sky turned red with the promise of rain, though none came. Clara found Jesse mending a fence out by the south pasture. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of cedar and dust. He looked up when she rode near, his hand resting on the post like he wasn't sure whether to greet her or keep his distance. She dismounted slowly, brushing her skirt against the saddle. For a moment, the world seemed still, no wind, no sound but the heartbeat of the earth beneath their boots. She asked about the fence. He answered short, his voice steady, but his eyes told a different story. They spoke about simple things: the herd, the weather, the drought, but every word carried something unspoken beneath it. And when she laughed softly, the kind of laugh that makes a man forget where he stands, Jesse turned away, like the sky had suddenly become too bright to look at. That night, the ranch hands gathered for supper in the cookhouse. Jesse sat alone, as he often did. Clara's chair at the main house stayed empty longer than usual. Folks whispered. Hank May didn't like whispers. He liked order, respect, and control. And he could see the way Clara's eyes followed that cowboy. It stirred something dark in him, fear, maybe, or pride. He'd worked his whole life to build the ranch, to protect his daughter from the roughness of the world. But he never stopped to think that maybe the roughness was what she craved, the truth of it, the grit. By the end of that summer, The air was electric with things unsaid. A drought can drive a man crazy, so can love. The land cracked, the cattle thinned, and tempers flared like lightning on dry brush. Jesse started talking about leaving once the season turned, finding work up north where the rains still came. But he didn't mean it. Not really. Something kept him there, tied to that ranch like a ghost that couldn't let go. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was her. One night, under a sliver of moon, Clara rode out to the ridge beyond the creek bed. She'd heard Jesse was out there, checking the herd. The stars were wide and cold above her. When she found him, he was leaning against the fence, the lantern glow catching his face in half-shadow. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the grass, and in that stillness, something passed between them, something fragile and wild and utterly doomed. The night hung still around them, heavy with all the words neither dared to say. The lantern light flickered in Jesse's hand, casting his face in gold and shadow, making him look half dream, half danger. Clara stood close enough to feel the warmth of his breath, the kind that carries both comfort and warning. For a long time, neither spoke. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do. Jesse finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough like gravel under boot heels. He said she shouldn't be out here alone, not this late, not with coyotes and storms about. But the way he said it wasn't scolding. It was care disguised as distance. Clara smiled, soft and stubborn, the way only a woman who knows her own heart can. She told him she wasn't afraid of the dark, that she'd spent her whole life out here under the same sky, but lately, it felt lonelier. And maybe that was why she'd come. Jesse looked away, his jaw tight. He'd seen enough of the world to know how easily something pure could turn into pain. The boss's daughter was a dream no cowboy should chase. But there she stood, her hair catching moonlight, her eyes steady on him like he was something worth believing in. He told himself to walk away, to tip his hat, mount his horse, and ride back before anything foolish happened. But the moment stretched too long. When Clara stepped closer, their hands brushed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't bold. Just the soft, accidental kind of touch that says more than 100 promises. The wind picked up then, carrying the scent of rain and dust and something sweeter, something like hope. And before Jesse could stop himself, his hand found hers, rough and calloused from work, fitting against her smaller one like it had been waiting all its life. For a heartbeat, they stood that way, two souls caught between duty and desire. Then she lifted her eyes, and he saw everything he'd been running from, warmth, freedom, and the terrifying pull of love. He leaned in, slow, hesitant, but once their lips met, the world fell away. The kiss wasn't long. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, wild, and trembling, and full of everything they'd been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart, the lantern had burned low, and the stars looked sharper than before. Jesse whispered her name like a prayer he knew would never be answered. Clara turned from him, her breath shaking, and said they couldn't do this again. He nodded, but they both knew that was a lie. Some fires, once lit, don't go out easily. The next morning came hard and bright. Jesse worked the corrals like nothing had changed, but the other hands noticed. He was quieter than usual, more distant. Clara kept to the house, helping her father with accounts, though her mind was miles away. Hank May watched her closely. He'd seen that look before on her mother's face, long ago. The same faraway softness that comes when a woman's heart has found its match. By the week's end, word started to drift through the ranch. Cowboys talked more than they should, and it didn't take long for someone to notice the boss's daughter sneaking down to the barns after sunset. It might have been innocent, but gossip in a dry season spreads faster than brush fire. Hank didn't believe it at first. He trusted his daughter's upbringing. But one night, he went looking for her after dinner and found her horse missing from the stable. He rode out under the moon, past the creek and toward the ridge. The sound of distant laughter caught on the wind, faint but clear. When he saw them, Clara and Jesse, sitting by the fence line, the lantern between them, something broke inside him. Not just anger, but fear. Fear of losing control, of losing the one thing he loved most to a man who had nothing to offer but a dream. The days that followed were thick with tension. Hank didn't confront them right away. He waited, watched, and tested Jesse with harder work, longer hours, hoping the man would break or leave. But Jesse didn't bend. If anything, he worked harder. It wasn't pride, it was purpose. Every nail he drove, every fence he mended, was a way to prove himself worthy of something he could never have. Clara tried to speak with her father, to make him see that Jesse was more than a hired hand. But Hank wouldn't listen. He told her love was a fancy word, but life was made of land and grit, and the kind of money that kept a roof up when storms came. Clara told him that a man's heart was worth more than his wallet, but Hank only shook his head. He'd lived too long to believe in dreams. Then came the night of the storm. It rolled in from the west like a living thing, dark, roaring, and full of fury. Lightning split the sky, and thunder cracked open the night. The herd scattered in fear, breaking fences, tearing through the pastures. Every man on the ranch was called to ride, and Jesse was first in the saddle. Rain poured down like the heavens were trying to drown the world. Clara stood on the porch, watching through the sheets of water as Jesse and the others rode into the chaos. The wind howled, tearing her hair loose, but she didn't care. Somewhere in that storm was the man she loved, and she couldn't stand still while he faced it alone. She threw on her coat, grabbed her reins, and mounted up, her father shouting after her to stay put. But the storm swallowed his words whole. Out in the pasture, the night was madness. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the sky burned with lightning. Clara found Jesse near the creek, trying to turn the cattle from the rising flood. The water was fierce, dragging everything it touched. He saw her through the rain and yelled for her to get back, but she shook her head. Together, they fought to drive the herd toward higher ground, their voices lost to the storm. Then, in a single moment, a bolt of lightning struck a tree near the creek. The ground split, the horses reared, and Clara's mount slipped on the slick earth. She fell hard, the current pulling her toward the torrent. Jesse leapt from his saddle, diving into the mud and water. He caught her arm just before the flood could take her, holding on with everything he had. The water tore at them, wild and merciless. Jesse dug his boots into the bank, muscles straining, but the ground kept giving way. Clara cried out, her fingers slipping. For a heartbeat, time froze, her life, his love, all hanging in the balance. Then Jesse pulled with one last burst of strength, dragging her clear just as the current surged past. They fell together on the soaked ground, shaking, gasping, alive. For a moment, the world went silent again, just rain falling soft against their skin. Jesse brushed the mud from her face, his hand trembling. And though the storm still raged around them, Clara smiled faintly, whispering that she knew he'd come for her. When the dawn came, the storm was gone. But the damage was done, fences broken, cattle scattered, and something deeper cracked inside the ranch itself. Hank May found them by the creek, exhausted and holding on to each other. He didn't say a word. He just looked at them, his daughter, and the cowboy who had saved her life, and something cold settled in his eyes. The sun rose heavy and red that morning, dragging light across a land changed by the storm. The pastures were torn, fences broken, and the creek still ran high and muddy. Men moved slowly, tired from the night's battle with wind and water. But the worst damage couldn't be seen from horseback or mended with nails. It lived inside the hearts of three people who'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Hank May stood at the porch rail, watching Jesse saddle up in silence. The air between them was thick as smoke after gunfire. Hank's jaw was set hard, his eyes colder than a winter dawn. He didn't thank the cowboy for saving his daughter. He didn't need to. The way his fingers gripped the rail said everything, gratitude buried under pride, pride buried under something darker. When Clara came down from the house, pale from exhaustion, her father turned to her with a look that stopped her in her tracks. There was no anger in it, not anymore. Just disappointment deep enough to break a soul. He told her to stay away from the hands, that the ranch didn't need gossip or shame, and most of all, it didn't need trouble. She wanted to speak, to tell him that love wasn't trouble, that Jesse had risked his life for hers. But he wouldn't listen. Hank May was a man who'd built his life on rules, and love, especially love with a cowboy, had no place in them. Jesse didn't argue either. He knew the look in Hank's eyes, the kind that saw men as tools to be used, not as sons to be trusted. He'd seen it before on every ranch he ever worked. He thought maybe this place could be different, but deep down, he knew better. Some fences weren't made of wood or wire. They were made of blood and pride. By midday, word spread that Jesse was leaving. He told the foreman he'd settle up at Week's End and move north. The hands said little, though one or two clapped him on the shoulder when the boss wasn't looking. Everyone knew why he was going. Everyone knew who he was leaving behind. Clara found him later that evening, out by the stables, tightening the cinch on his horse. The air was still damp from the storm, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. She asked if it was true that he was leaving. Jesse didn't look up. He said the ranch had no more need for him, and that the work was done. His words were steady, but his hands shook as he packed the saddlebag. She stepped closer, her voice breaking as she told him he couldn't just ride off, not after everything. But he said some things a man has to do, even when his heart begs him not to. He told her that staying would only bring her more pain, that her father's hate would spread like wildfire until it burned them both to ash. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She didn't bother to hide. She said she didn't care about her father's pride, that love was worth fighting for. But Jesse just smiled, tired and gentle. He told her she didn't understand what a man like him carried, the dust, the scars, the kind of loneliness that sticks to your bones. He said she deserved a better life, one not built on the edge of another man's anger. As the sky darkened, she reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Not out of coldness, but out of fear that one more touch would undo all his resolve. He said he'd always remember her, that no matter where the trail led, her face would ride with him. She wanted to ask him to stay, to tell him she loved him. But before she could, Hank's voice thundered from the porch. He told Jesse to leave the ranch by dawn, that he didn't want to see his horse tied there come morning. Clara tried to speak, but Hank silenced her with a glare that could stop a stampede. Jesse nodded once, tipping his hat in quiet respect, though his chest burned with words he couldn't say. He turned and walked away, the sound of his boots fading into the night. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching the moonlight spill across the fields, listening for the sound of a horse she knew she'd never hear again. Every creak of the windmill, every whisper of the grass, sounded like his name. She thought about running after him, about riding north until the stars ran out, but something in her heart, maybe the same stubbornness she got from her father, kept her still. By morning, Jesse was gone. No goodbye, no letter. Just hoof prints in the soft dirt by the gate. The ranch felt emptier than it had in years. The hands worked quietly. Clara moved like a ghost through her days, her laughter gone, her fire dimmed. Hank noticed, though he said nothing. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that someday she'd see it too. But every time he saw her look toward the hills, his chest tightened with guilt he couldn't name. Weeks passed. The land dried again, but now it was a different kind of drought, one that lived inside the heart. Then one afternoon, a rider came from town with news. There'd been a fire up north, near Abilene. A herd spooked, a barn caught flame. They said a cowboy had gone back in to save a trapped boy. Only one horse came out. The cowboy never did. When Clara heard the name, Jesse Cole, her knees gave out beneath her. The world seemed to tilt, the sky spinning above her like a cruel trick. The rider said they'd buried him out near the river, under a mesquite tree, no kin to claim him. Just a cross of cedar and a hat nailed to the post. For days, Clara didn't speak. She rode out alone every evening, past the fences he'd mended, the trails they'd ridden, the ridge where they'd shared that one forbidden kiss. Every sunset felt like goodbye all over again. Hank watched her from the porch, his heart heavy. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her he was sorry, but pride is a cruel thing. It can silence even the truest remorse. One night, Clara came home late, covered in dust and tears. She told her father she'd been to the ridge, that she'd prayed for Jesse's soul and forgiven the world for taking him. Hank said nothing for a long while. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something she hadn't seen before, Jesse's old bandana, worn and sun-faded. He said he'd found it by the creek after the storm and couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Clara took it with shaking hands, holding it like a relic of something too precious to name. That night, the ranch was quiet. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint scent of rain and memory. And though Jesse was gone, his presence lingered in the land he loved, in the girl who still dreamed of him, and even in the heart of the man who'd once driven him away. Seasons changed on the Whispering Spur Ranch. The rains returned late that year, soft and uncertain, as if the sky itself was trying to make peace with what it had taken. The grass rose again, shy and green, pushing through the dust of what had once been sorrow. But some things don't grow back the same. Some things, like love, like loss, settle deep into the roots and become part of the land itself. Clara May carried on, though her eyes had a faraway look now, the kind that comes from loving someone who's gone beyond reach. She still rode the fences, still tended the horses, still spoke kindly to the hands. But every dawn, when the mist hung low over the fields, she'd find herself gazing toward the north ridge, where the wind sang through the mesquite like a hymn. Folks said she talked to the sky out there. Maybe she did. Maybe she was talking to him. Hank May had grown quieter, too. The years weighed heavier on him, and the sound of his daughter's laughter, which had once filled the house, was something he missed more than he cared to admit. He told himself that he'd done what any father would have done, protected his child from a life of hardship. But every time he saw the old bandana folded neatly on her dresser, he felt a sting of regret. Pride, he realized, was a poor fence to build between a father and his daughter. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the sky in colors of fire and forgiveness, Hank walked out to where Clara sat on the fence rail, watching the herds graze in the dimming light. The air was calm, touched with the scent of sage and dust. He stood beside her, his hat in his hands, searching for words that had taken him too long to find. He said he was sorry for the anger, for the silence, for thinking love was something a man could forbid. He told her he'd spent his life trying to keep her safe, but all he'd done was keep her heart in a cage. Clara didn't answer right away. She just looked out at the horizon where the first stars were starting to appear. Then she smiled, small and sad, and said she forgave him. She said Jesse had once told her that love wasn't meant to be kept, it was meant to be carried, wherever life took you. For the first time in a long time, Hank smiled too. It was a weary kind of smile, but honest. He told her that maybe it was time to let Jesse rest, not just in the ground, but in their hearts, where he belonged. Clara nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. She said that Jesse wasn't gone, not really. That every time the wind brushed the tall grass, or the horses ran free through the valley, she could feel him near. A week later, Clara rode north. She didn't tell her father where she was going, but he knew. Some journeys don't need explaining. She rode through miles of open prairie, past old ghost towns and lonely rivers, until she reached a small hill by the banks of the Red Fork. There, beneath a wide mesquite tree, she found a simple wooden cross weathered by rain and sun. His hat still hung from it, the brim curled and faded, the same way he used to wear it. She knelt beside the grave, the wind tugging at her hair, and spoke softly to the earth. She told him the ranch was doing better, that the fences were mended and the cattle were strong. She told him her father had changed, that the anger had turned into something gentler. And then she told him she missed him, that not a day passed when she didn't think of his hands, his voice, his quiet way of looking at the world. When she stood to leave, she tied a small ribbon of blue silk, the color of the dress she wore the night they first met, around the cross. Then she whispered one last thing, something the wind caught and carried away, that she would love him as long as the stars kept shining over Texas. Back at the Whispering Spur, time moved on. Clara took over more of the ranch work, proving herself every bit as strong and capable as the men she led. Hank watched her with pride that was softer now, less about control and more about admiration. He'd lost much in his life, but in learning to let go, He'd found something worth keeping, understanding. Years passed, and stories began to grow like wildflowers across the valley. The ranch hands spoke of a cowboy who'd once tamed the untamable horse, who'd fought the storm and saved the boss's daughter, and who'd loved her so deeply that not even death could take him from her heart. They said on quiet nights, when the wind blew down from the north, you could hear the faint sound of hoofbeats by the creek and the whisper of two voices, carried together like prayer and promise. Clara never married. Some said she couldn't find another man who measured up to that quiet cowboy. Others said she didn't try. What they didn't know was that she didn't need to. Love like that doesn't fade, it just changes shape. It becomes part of who you are, part of the land you walk on, part of every sunrise and every breath. As the years folded one into another, Clara grew older, her hair touched with silver, her spirit still bright. When Hank passed, she buried him beside the cottonwoods overlooking the ranch, the same place where she and Jesse once watched the storm roll in. On his headstone, she carved a simple line, "He learned that love can't be fenced." Every now and then, travelers passing through would see her riding alone at dusk, her figure framed against the setting sun. They said she looked like a ghost out of time, but there was nothing haunting about her, only peace. The kind of peace that comes when you've known great love, great loss, and still found reason to keep going. One summer evening, years later, the ranch hands saw her ride out toward the North Ridge one last time. The sky was wide open, glowing with the kind of light that only comes at the end of a story. They watched her disappear into the horizon, her horse moving steady and sure. When she didn't return by nightfall, they went looking, but all they found was her hat resting on the fence post by the ridge, and the faint scent of wildflowers drifting on the wind. They buried her beside the creek, under the same mesquite tree where Jesse lay. Two crosses stood side by side, one weathered, one new. And when the wind blew through that valley, it sounded almost like laughter, like love echoing through the grass. Under that wide Texas sky, where hearts are born wild and memories never die, the story of the cowboy and the ranch boss's girl lived on. It was told in every saloon and whispered in every storm. And though their lives were brief as a summer thundercloud, their love became part of the legend of the land itself, a reminder that some things, once true, stay true forever. And if you ever find yourself riding through that country at sunset, listen close. You might just hear the soft rustle of the wind through the mesquite and the faint rhythm of two horses riding together, forever free beneath the open sky.